into this. Exactly. Let's do our clap for both of you, actually, both Yiting and Julia. Everybody's coming back to this session. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, so I hope you had time for a little break. If you really need one, I think please take the opportunity to take it now, because we have our final, basically it's already the final research presentation, and we saved the best for last. Obviously not because all of the talks were amazing and really interesting, but these are our award winners. So we kind of decided to kind of give them the spotlight of the final presentation. So for those of you who were there last week, you know that Koen and Raoul got the most promising research award of the conference, which is a new award that the conference is going to give out in the next few years. And also, I think today is a good day to talk about the topic that you are going to talk about. So I will just, without much further ado, just hand this over to Raoul and to Koen to tell us about how social media has impacted the election last time round and what's happening maybe this time round. That would be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carolyn, for having us and giving us the presentation here and the opportunity to show our work. So I'm just trying basically to get acquainted with the presentation system. So I hope everyone can see the presentation.
We can, thanks.
Great, and Koen is here too, so that's great news. So yeah, welcome everybody, and thanks a lot for giving us the opportunity to talk about the 2016 elections. As there was so much demand and it seems to be somehow timely, we allowed to sacrifice some of the space and time we have to also provide a little update of what we observed for the 2020 elections. I hope that's fine with everybody. And let me just quickly start with the presentation, right? So talking about what politicians need to do to get elected. Well, if you look into the literature and the theory, that seems to be a problem that has been, well, bothering people, philosophers, researchers for quite a while. So if you look into the old Roman literature, people already complain that, well, politicians usually don't or overpromise during the race. If you think about Machiavelli, so he's saying, well, you can do anything, lie, murder, whatever you like to do just to get in power. So that seems to be an old problem that, well, people promise things once they want to get elected, and then in the long run, they might not keep their promises or even act in a completely different way. And I hope you also Game of Thrones by now, because otherwise I really apologize for the spoiler here. Fast forward to 2016. Well, things actually changed a little, or didn't change a lot, with Donald Trump basically saying, well, I could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and not lose any voters, right? Because I have a very strong and very engaged, supportive fan base that is standing for me, no matter what people throw at me, what people say about me in social media, it won't backfire. If we translate that, by the way, into 2020, we see that even keeping promises, well, can have severe consequences. As well, the first quote translated into 2020 would be something like, well, I can publicly announce how I spread misinformation about mail fraud and how I will appeal the election with the Supreme Court, and, well, people will still vote for me. And I think that's basically what we saw. So it's no big surprise that, well, the initial enthusiasm and the idea that giving people more information or access to more information will lead to more transparency and better political decision-making actually decreased rather quickly over the last decade, with the Journal of Democracy first having a special issue kind of saying, well, social media, the new liberation technology, and then in 2017 having another special issue that brings up the question, can democracy survive the internet? So apparently handing over information to the public brings the problem that it becomes harder and harder to judge what is true information, what is false information, what is good information, what is bad information. How should I deal with all the information that is bombarding me? How can I separate basically the truth from the false? And well, if you look at Raoul et al.'s paper in, I think it's Science from 2018, well, we all have been targeted and exposed to fake information frequently. So they show that even back in 2016, by average, people have been exposed to more than 4 fake news during the election campaign. So the question is, how does that influence basically the quality of well, of democracy or of political life? And how does that change of a rapid information environment basically impact our society and our political life? Well, Tucker et al. In 2018 presented a quite sophisticated conceptual model for that, where they discussed different touch points that all basically somehow determine the quality of public policy and democracy. And we see that disinformation plays a key part here right in the middle. We have traditional as well as new media in there, classic politicians' behavior, political engagement, both lead to, or all of these factors lead to some sort of polarization that also gets driven by, of course, the level of disinformation that is within the system, which then all basically determines the quality of well, our political system and society. If we look how much we know about the impact of the different constructs in that framework, we see that there are many studies that look at particular points in the framework, right? So we know there is research that looks on, well, how does social media use impact political polarization or political preferences? There is research that specifically looks at the impact of fake news on political preferences. We know a lot since the, well, 30s, 20s about how traditional media use and media coverage is affecting political polarization, etc., etc. What is imminent is basically that there is no research that brings all of that together. And so when we saw Tucker's framework, we were thinking, okay, maybe we can try to use all the data we have at our hand from social media as well as from other secondary data sources to fill that framework and to come up with that study that brings everything together and tries to actually develop a dynamic model that accounts for the different relations across these things. So what we did is we started by filling the framework with, well, social media data. So we tried to collect all sorts of comments, posts from the different platforms we had access to, so Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, that mentioned one of the 2 candidates, so either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. To get a better understanding and to, well, develop insights or information that were related to the different touch points in the framework, we applied different text mining techniques. So Verena was just presenting her wonderful fake newspaper, which they looked into emotions and text sentiment. So that's something we're doing too. We're adding basically the moral foundation dimension, where we use Hyde's moral foundation dictionary to measure actually which type of morality topics candidates are speaking about or the public is speaking about, and to also get an understanding about which topics are driving the election or are driven by the election. We also apply actually LDA topic analysis models, which helps us to understand about what candidates are speaking, what the press is speaking about, what kind of fake news are circulating, etc., etc. So using that rich set of social media data, we basically get a good understanding of the social media use of the candidates. So we know what they do in the well, in the new world or in the digital world. We get through the LDA analysis of what the classic media was reporting on social media, an idea of traditional media coverage. We use the, well, very prominent fake news list that have just also been used in the very recent Nature publication that looks at fake news circulation in the 2016 and 2020 elections. to classify disinformation and to then use an LDA analysis to get a better understanding of which topics are addressed by disinformative media. And finally, to understand political polarization, we measure topics, emotions, morality, and sentiment in all of the social media posts and comments sent out by users during the time mentioning either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. Of course, that does not give us all information necessary. So if we want to understand political preferences, of course, we need other measures. So we enrich our set with polling data. Two types of polling data. We have probabilistic polls, so polls where people are not only asked to indicate for which candidate they're going to vote for, but also polling data where they are also asked how likely they are to go vote. We contrast these polls with the classic traditional polls where people are only asked which candidate they prefer. And there we use the average poll score, which is obtained by 538, one of the leading polling institutions in the US. However, that of course, well, might be skewed, or there might be issues with polling as we just recently experienced. So we also add a third data source to the data set, which are daily donations, which we also perceive to be somehow a proxy measure for political or candidate preference, right? And the nice thing in the US is that the Federal Election Commission is basically providing a large data set where you have all the individual contributions to the two campaigns, and you can just aggregate them on a daily basis and take that again as some sort of preference measure. What is missing in here? Well, of course, advertising, marketing activities. So to, well, cover that type of information, we use Kantar ad spend database, from which we obtain basically the TV ad airtime and topic data for the two candidates. So Kantar actually is tracking about what topics candidates were speaking in their TV advertisements, and we know exactly per day how many seconds have been aired for each topic, and so we can flow that also into our database. Last but not least, we of course want to control for different external events and shocks that probably also impacted the 2016 election. So there are many that might still come to your mind, like, you know, the release of Clinton's emails, the investigations, the Access Hollywood tape where Trump, was caught talking about, well, his sexual activities, etc., etc. So coming back to the Tucker framework, we can basically, well, fill most of the conceptual parts of the framework. Of course, we need to cut basically the, well, final outcome, which is the total quality of the political system, as we don't have a measure for that. We even don't dare basically to say, well, we are able to track that or to measure that. So we just stop one step before that, which is basically the political choice, which we depict by the probabilistic polls and the traditional polls. Talking about the polling data, we all know it's a very difficult field, but we think that we identified one of the polls that hasn't been off in 2016. So yes, we all remember 2016. We were very much surprised about what was going on, how things developed. Still here, we think that the US, so the University of Southern California, Dornsiff polls were quite good, by the fact that they were not only asking participants who they like more, but also how likely they were going to go to vote for a candidate. And if you look at the time series in here, you will realize that many of the events that caught a lot of attention also show basically reactions in an anticipative way for the two candidates. So before we come to the analysis and I hand over to Koen, let me just briefly show you some of the data we collected, right? So this is basically are the results of the LDA analysis, so the topic analysis of the social media posts of the two candidates for the 3 different platforms, so Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So for Clinton, we find 8 topics. For Trump, we find 6 topics. Both of them attack each other, both of them highlight their personal traits. What I find quite striking is to see that back in 2016, both campaigns had some difficulties to deal with Instagram. So in case of Instagram, we see that posting behavior is much more volatile throughout the campaign race. They are trying out topics. They apparently try to measure what is working, what is not working. So whereas we see for the other platforms much more stable behavior. How does that affect basically public opinion, media coverage? If we look at how the different media outlets are reporting on the two candidates, first of all, we find that in 2016, Trump profited a lot from some extra coverage, and that came especially from the left to lean left media that reported twice the time about Trump than about Clinton. In addition, if they reported or if they wrote or covered Clinton, then mostly even the left and lean left, as well as the center media, focused more actually on the rivalry between Clinton and Sanders within the party, and only very late in the race started to focus more on promoting Clinton and showing Clinton in the battle line. Good. So what is the most discussed topic for 2016 as well as of today? Of course, fake news, right? So analyzing the 2020 data set now, I feel more like, wow, 2016 has been a splendid year where, fake news circulation wasn't as much of a problem as it seems to be today. So in total, we identify 4 fake news topics that have been shared with the name of Hillary Clinton with them. And we find 5 topics basically that often occur in any social media posts that mentions Donald Trump. However, what we also see is that no matter on which candidate or with which candidate news have been shared in a social media post or a social media comment, it turns out that most of the fake news are actually targeting Hillary Clinton specific topics. And if we just try to really bring it together, largely things actually focus on the email investigations, what people might find in her email. So rumors go from, that might be that she might be involved in a pedophile ring, child trafficking ring, that she has ties actually to ISIS, that there is a secret plague movement trying to take over the US, etc., etc. So combining all of our text mining analysis, bringing everything together, we ended up with over 250 variables originating from the different media channels we had, the different types of analysis we did, so the different emotion analysis, the different sentiment types of analysis, the topic analysis, that together with all the other data led actually to over 250 variables. And so, at the end of the day, when we tried to then finally bring everything together to estimate a model, the big question was, how can we basically identify the most suitable variables for our model prediction? Which variables should we put into the final analytical model? And I think Koen is the better person now to explain you how we achieve that.
You mute, Koen, you mute. The classic.
Oh, thank you. Yes, so kind of in the next slide, we have 2 approaches. So the first thing we use is Granger causality, which just shows that there's a temporal precedent. So some things change before the polls, some things change afterwards. And so in our application, we also now are using lasso to identify a set of variables. In the next slide, so some of the things that came out, so we basically boiled down the 250 to just 15 variables. And so a lot of things that were believed to have a huge effect by the pundits actually showed not to have an effect. Next slide. So ultimately, we identified, of course, the relative importance of the influence with the vector autoregressive model, and it performs pretty well in different demographics. Next slide. Some interesting illustrations. So this is Hillary Clinton's campaign talking about women's issues on the left on Instagram, on the right on Twitter. So we find that the same kind of message has a positive effect on her poll gap chances on Instagram, but a negative on Twitter. So hence the main kind of message that the topic and the platform really matters. Yeah, next slide. So in terms of cumulative impact, we actually find that the fake news about Hillary Clinton's emails was the major driver. And so this is the poll gap effect of a 1 standard deviation change. As you see in blue, the effect on traditional polls for most variables was very different than the red effect on the probabilistic polls. So for instance, the Trump Access Hollywood tape here had an effect on the traditional polls of increasing Hillary's chances because people said, well, this is disgusting, this is horrible, but it did not drive the probabilistic poll at all. And so we see that pattern throughout this investigation. Next slide. So in terms of relative importance, so the fake news about the emails actually accounted for 1/3 of all the poll gap variance that we can explain in there. So in terms of everything else that you have seen, TV ads were important. We have topics of gun control and the economy that really mattered. But in our analysis, it was really fake news about her emails that drove the final days of the election. Next slide. And then my conceptual boxes, just to show you that fake news about Clinton, kind of in the middle, has a lot more effect on the probabilistic poll than it had on the in blue on the traditional poll. Let's do the next one. Okay, so in general, what really drives the poll gap? Fake news about the email, Clinton statements that we analyzed, and TV ads about the economy were very powerful. On the Republican side, kind of the morality of the comments, Trump's ads talking about terrorism and threats, and in general is a positive sentiment about Trump on social media. What did not drive the polls but was driven by them are things like donations. So you typically donate when you feel your candidate is behind, and also the number of tweets that the Trump campaign did. Next slide. Well, current perspective very quickly. As you can see, fake news has not stopped. We actually found that the volume is almost 6 times larger than in 2016. What is different this time around is that the probabilistic and the traditional polls are much more in alignment about what they said. But we again see that the media covers Trump a lot more in the next slide. So even the left-leaning media, which are to your left, basically spend a lot more attention discussing Trump, which is the bottom part, than they do discussing Biden, the Democratic candidate. Next slide. And then out of the 18 disinformation fake news topics that we found with our LDA analysis, 14 favor Trump. So this goes from COVID-19 to Antifa and the Black Lives Matter movement, to defund the police and to fraud. Only a few related to Russia, Texas, and White House internal stuff favor Biden. Next slide. So what was driving the polls this time? Well, we find a big effect again of false news, not about his emails, but about Black Lives Matter. So the fake news that Biden is a socialist who wants to burn our cities and encourages the riots, that worked very well. And the second topic was then COVID-19. What about the importance? Well, we see for the traditional polls that Trump's Facebook followers becomes very important. So there is this discrepancy again to what people say in the polls and what they show online, for instance, with following Trump there. In the probabilistic poll, you see a lot of impact of the false news on COVID. So even though traditional and probabilistic polls are closer together in terms of their prediction of which candidate would be winning, we do again see this very different effect, and it changes over time. Next slide. So main contributions. It is very important to have good market research also in politics. And so that really matters. So thinking carefully about how the surveys are constructed, what are you asking, is very important. External events did matter, but not as much as how they resonate with the candidate strategy. So one of the big differences we see this time around is that the Democratic candidate didn't seem faced by any kind of fake news topic. Whereas Hillary Clinton in her book, What Happened, basically said, well, after the Comey letter about my emails 2 weeks before the election, we felt we had to completely change the topic. So they went away from focus on things like the economy to focusing on things like minority rights and the first female president, which in our analysis did not play well with the public. Mainstream matters, but is a lot less important than fake news in our analysis, which is kind of depressing, but it comes out in other research too. And then finally, place really matters. So it's not just kind of which topic you talk about, but also on which platform. And with this, we realize we have gone over time. So thank you so much. Kofefe.
Thank you so much, both of you. Okay, so there was a lot in there, and a lot, and there might be follow-up questions. We're a tiny bit over time, but not really a lot because the closing is not going to take that long. So I think we have time for questions. So who wants to go first? No questions?
So Koen, maybe I'll ask a question. I don't know what exactly is fake news. Is it very easy to and clearly be able to define what is fake? Is it also 0, 1, or is it a range of fakeness? Yeah, any thoughts on that?
I leave that up to Raoul.
Thank you. I think this is a really good question, but basically, what most people do in research as well as in practice is they focus on who is spreading the information. And so what we do, and I didn't mention that, and I'm sorry for that, is we track actually all links that have been shared in the name of a candidate. And then we look where they lead to. And there are lists that basically classify websites into fake news spreaders and non-fake news spreaders. And even for the fake news spreaders, there are then subcategories like biased news, hate news, rumor news, conspiracy theory news, etc., etc. And so for each of these categories, we have hundreds of links. And what we do is we just check if a story that has been shared somewhere on social media comes from any of these sites, and then we classify it accordingly.
It's mostly based on the source of the message.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the alternative would indeed be to go through every one of these messages and to identify exactly, and then you could make that a moving scale from 0 to 1, right? So to what extent is it? Because there's always some combination of some ground of truth and some slant on it. And so I think the one thing that helps us is that the sources are pretty well defined. And so they've seen several lists. The other thing what was really interesting to us is that for fake news, the headline is typically the whole message. So it's relatively easy to see what's going on because the sharers know that people don't read an article, even if it's just half a page. They know that you're sharing the headline. And so very typically you can read it from there. Yeah,
in fact, incomplete stories are most often fake then, by just excluding some information.
Yeah, excluding context puts things in a very different light. Yeah, thank you.
So we would capture that by the biased news sources. So there is a category that accounts for it. And I mean, so the problem with the data we have, or what we can observe right now, is mostly that we don't capture the full volume of fake news. So if somebody is sharing a story based on a link, but not sharing the link, we don't capture it. So what we capture is basically only what really real people believe and share. So it's more like an outcome of fake news that we can track and measure, which I think is a very powerful measure, because when we think about where do fake news come from, so they have been seeded by these Russian bot factories, right? So we know from previous research, and Raoul has done amazing work in that area, that real people need to share it. And I think what we are capturing largely is basically this real people shares. And given that they really impact basically also political preference according to our model results, I think we are onto something in here.
Thank you.
Thank you. There is a question from Vera and then Peter. And I think we just about probably have time to do that.
Yeah,
Vera.
great. Yeah, this is so really interesting and obviously very timely. I was wondering, and I know this is a tough one, but if fake news is so important, what can we do about it? Any ideas of how? I mean, wow.
I mean, this has been discussed with lots of other research, right? So one main way is to label it, just like we label food. So label how close the source is. So ideally you would want to know with any piece of news whether 7 experienced journalists spent 3 weeks with investigations to uncover that, or whether somebody fabricated in their bedroom like Mina, right? So ideally you would want to do that, but then experiments have showed that people are not much affected by that. Just like we, when I go to the supermarket, I don't turn things around and look at the nutrition, right? Which explains my my weight right now. But so that doesn't seem to be working very much. What helps in experiments is priming people for accuracy versus, what does my tribe share? So there is some encouraging kind of results that if you really prime people for, hey, accuracy, truth is important in society, it's a win-win for everybody if truthful things are shared. Then that seems to help. But again, so it's, that's something that we don't tackle, unfortunately, in this research.
I mean, also I think there is a silver line looking into our 2020 results. So our analysis revealed that mostly rumors or actually fake news related to Black Lives Matter and COVID-19 were harming Biden in the ongoing race, right? But if we looked into what people really shared, it was mostly related to Hunter Biden's emails affair, right? So apparently the limiting factor in these fake news campaigns is that the real people that are needed to add credibility to the fake news don't necessarily share the ones that truly harm. And so the limitation to stupid news might be the stupidity of people. I think that is some sort of silver lining on the horizon in here. Of course, we should also flag things and we should check things, and probably we should just educate people to be better able to judge what is good information, what is bad information, to come to their own conclusion and to their own reason, right? Or reasoning, actually.
Yeah.
As somebody who's currently teaching 624 undergraduates critical thinking, I can only approve of that. Peter, a final question.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. I have one question for you guys. It's also about this fake news. I actually, well, never mind. What I think is important to think about is the impact of fake news. Is that large because could that be large because it's picking up because the effect of the real news is actually picked up by other variables, whereas the fake news is a source of variance that is completely outside of the system and therefore really adds something to the explanatory variable. So it's not necessarily that fake news is important in terms of, how well it predicts the vote. It's more that it adds variance to the entire system.
Interesting. Yeah.
But you guys probably have model statistics that can either refute or support my claim.
Well, I think this is, I don't have the correlation matrix on me, right? But that would indeed be very interesting. So I think, what would be consistent with your story is that of the 250 variables, a lot of those were very correlated with the traditional news items, whereas fake news was not. So that's something that we can at least verify. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So final round of applause. And I'm going to just repeat that Raoul and Koen said last week that the future of the US is blue, not red. So I think as we keep watching, we will keep holding you to account for that prediction. Okay.